we're going to dive into how to hire neurodiverse graduate candidates. We're going to bust some myths, and we're going to hopefully hear some interesting stories and opinions. Bit of housekeeping, please visit learn.headstart.io/panel to join in today's poll. You can leave your questions and we'll get to a Q&A at the end. You can view a live transcript there as well, and feel free, share your thoughts, mention us at headstart.io and tag us on LinkedIn as well. So today's poll is going to be, what percentage of UK autistic adults are not in full-time employment? So let me introduce myself. My name's Tom Price-Daniel, and I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Headstart. And I feel stupid often. I'm dyslexic and was once described as a Porsche with a handbrake on by a psychologist. I like the idea of being a Porsche, but in truth, my handwriting is the speed of a Skoda and I spell very poorly. Only really researching this topic recently have I realized the extent to which it shaped my life. The embarrassment that I feel, and it kind of comes at me like a monster waiting to pull me into a black hole. And it still happens to me today. Only yesterday I was with a potential prospect, and I had an hour and 45 minutes screen sharing, no Grammarly, no spell check. It's kind of my worst nightmare. My case is mild, and that in itself also makes me feel anxious and slightly inadequate occasionally, something I didn't really realize until I got onto this. So today, I hope we're going to bust some myths, and we're going to show why the world needs to take notice of neurodiverse candidates. So let's introduce our panel, and let's kick it off with yourself, Theo.
Hey, hello, thanks for having me on. So I'm Theo Smith. I'm the host of a podcast, Neurodiversity, Eliminating Kryptonite, Enabling Superheroes. I also have written a book with Professor Amanda Kirby on neurodiversity at work. I'm passionate about neurodiversity because late diagnosis of dyslexia and ADHD. I received my degree late in life, and family are affected by neurodiversity as well. So it's something that I just kind of want to be an evangelist for the subject. I think it's incredible, and I think we need to kind of be more positive around what neurodiversity can bring to organisations at all levels.
Thanks, Theo. Annabelle?
Yes, great. My name's Annabelle Nichols. I've worked for over 20 years in recruiting and professional services, specialising in early talent, diversity and strategy. Currently working at an organisation called Avanade, which is owned by Accenture and Microsoft, looking after diversity and transformation globally. On a personal level, I live near Cambridge with my husband Tom and 3 teenage boys, and I come from a broad neurodiverse family with individuals that have autism, ADHD and anxiety, but stretch across a huge range of professions, filmmakers, music technicians, computer analysts and 2 CEOs. So I'm hugely passionate about making sure that we see the gifts of people with neurodiversity rather than seeing it as challenges and difficulties. I'm particularly delighted to be here today, given that April is Autism Acceptance Month, and the 2nd of April last week was World Autism Day. So I'm really excited to be on the panel.
Super, thanks very much. Laura?
Hello everyone, I'm Laura Yates, Head of Graduate Talent at the law firm Clifford Chance. I've been there about 15 years, having done a number of roles, one of which was a year-long secondment to our London managing partner at the time, doing a comms and strategy role. I'm also at the moment co-chair of our inclusion committee, but my day-to-day role is graduate recruitment and development, which means I get the amazing job of going out and finding wonderful people such as Tom, who's your next guest you're going to introduce.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, tell us about yourself. I love that you are, graduate candidate of the year. That to me sounds fantastic.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Tom. My pronouns are he and him, and I identify openly as both gay and autistic. and I've done a lot in the diversity space, teaching sign language, so autism and neurodiverse, and a lot in LGBT and autism. And obviously, being Autism Awareness Month, I think it's really important to champion neurodiverse voices and be a role model for other autistic individuals that are looking to enter the workplace or are in the workplace and are maybe struggling to come out to their colleagues and peers.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thanks very much, Tom. Theo, I just want to pick up on something. When we were off screen, you kind of had a bit of go at me about the fact that I said that I had mild dyslexia. Just kind of talk to us a little bit about why you said that and what it is that you see about trying to change the narrative of the conversation.
Yeah, okay. So I think there's something really important that's been front and center in my mind at the moment, and that's intersectionality. So just to put it simply, because I need things put simply. So I don't like big words, even though I use them, and I try and explain them then. But intersectionality, the fact that we all come from different backgrounds, different experiences, different cultures, ethnicities, right? And it's all of those things that make us up as human beings, right? So when you say something like mild dyslexia, you kind of ignoring all the other things that make you a human being, right? And for me, those things are important, and I think we need to address them. We need to look at them, and we need to consider them, because mild dyslexia may be the way that you see it, but it's the whole journey in life. And if we only look at it based on mild dyslexia, and I get where you're coming from, because I'd say I only have mild dyslexia, but I'm also impacted by ADHD. I also can't count, right? I can't spell. There's a lot of things I can't do, right? Without many qualifications. But you build these things up. Maybe I was brought up in a care home. I wasn't. These things can affect who I am in life. So that's what I meant by it. I think if we just focus on kind of the narrow elements of these things, we miss so much more about people. And that's what we need to do. We need to open up these conversations.
Yeah, I suppose in a way it's been embarrassing. By saying it, I'm almost, and I haven't really thought this through, and I'm completely riffing here, but by saying I'm mild, I'm saying it doesn't really affect me. I'm not really dyslexic. I'm not really in that gang. Yeah, that's not me. So no,
yeah,
go on, sorry.
I think there's another way. Sometimes, because it's an invisible disability, neurodiversity, some people can come up and say, you don't seem autistic, you don't appear to be autistic. And I think that that's really coming on the stereotypes and the narratives that they've been told from the media about what it is to be autistic. And so sometimes that can really invalidate. And so I think we also internalize that by saying we've only got it mildly, or we've only, because we ourselves think, oh, we've only got those amount of stereotypes. And so that's how we then judge what mild and major is.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up with that, Tom, I went to go and see my aunt yesterday, and she's got 2 children, and both are ASD, and one is in a school, and probably will struggle to get into a working environment, and another one has just got a place at Reading University. And I think it's going to go on to have kind of a full career. So just to kind of on that point, I think what would be great is if you could just, talk about what is autism to you, and how does it impact you personally?
I think it's been a journey. I think at the start, being autistic meant that I really struggled to make friends and connections, really struggled with facial expressions and expressing my own emotions. I really struggled with school. Had one-to-one tuition. I had, extra time in exams. And I think it was really through identifying great mentors, which I think is a key thing that I'll come on to, has really helped me then to grow and be an individual and have confidence in myself, confidence to try and make friends and then learn from those mistakes, to then progressing now where I won an award, and from that networking was able to secure a traineeship at Clifford Chance.
Sorry, Annabelle, I completely cut you off. So if you want to jump in at any point, feel free. I won't do it again, I promise.
Well, no, I won't jump in. I'll wait to be invited to speak. That's my
No, that's what I want. I want you to jump in.
I was just going back to your comment about being mild and the shame of admitting, or feeling the shame of admitting that you have something like that. I think it's also important for me, working for a corporate, is that whilst we always think about, new hires, I think there's also a huge spectrum of our own employees that maybe haven't necessarily thought of themselves on the spectrum, or are even aware that they are, or have maybe thought, gosh, I've always struggled with X, Y, and Z, maybe I am. And so I think there's that broad spectrum, as you mentioned, of people that may not even know that they're on that spectrum, or even aware that they too have some of these gifts and abilities that are overlooked.
I think there's a really important point there as well, and I think there's maybe a question that I'm gonna answer now because it's kind of front and center of my mind, and that's around diagnosis and the importance of a label or not to have a label. And I think you explained it perfectly there, which is there are many people who, due to their environments, due to the cultural nuances of where they grew up, their families, their environment, they're not going to be comfortable with coming forwards. They're not going to be comfortable with saying, I'm autistic or I'm dyslexic, because it is deemed a disability still. It is deemed a disability. And for some, it's not, it's an ability, but within certain societies, families, environments, they're not going to look kindly on somebody who's got a disability of the mind when they should become a doctor or a dentist. So we've got all of those complexities around this subject as well that can make it really difficult for people within our organisations, especially young people who are quite vulnerable early on in their career. They're at the lower end of that career ladder, therefore they can be highly influenced by the rest of those people in the organisation. Why are they going to put their hand up? They may not, and we have an obligation then to put the mechanisms in place to ensure that we protect them, look after them, and help them.
I think it also comes down to sort of your view and your lens on disability. You either come from like a medical model where you focus on the handicap or the disability or the disadvantage, or the social model where you see the society is disabling. Society needs to do more to be more inclusive. And I think which way you look at that on those models is how you maybe come across with that label, and why you would fear coming out and saying, I am autistic, I am neurodiverse.
I think that's why you're even just having you here is so kind of inspirational, right? Because I'm very lucky that my mum always told me I was special, and she was like, no, you're the cleverest thing on two legs. I think if I'd listened to some of the teachers sometimes, especially post exams, I always was able to be quite eloquent and talk to people about very complex subjects, and it came to actually writing them down, and the whole thing just completely fell apart, and it just made me feel a bit like a fraud. But I think that and maybe this is more about the menteeship that you're talking about. The only reference point I had as a dyslexic was Richard Branson, and now there's lots of awkward things about Richard Branson, especially these days. He kind of lives on his island in Necker. But, someone that was able to achieve, who did not do well in their kind of first career, which is school, to me was the only thing I could look at. And today, I think we need to have more corporate leaders. We need to have more people that put stuff at the end of their signature that says, do you know what, I'm dyslexic, or this, or whatever it might be. Do you feel like that? I mean, and actually, Laura, talking about your organisation, you've hired Tom. Yeah. Did I drop out?
A little bit.
Yeah.
You were saying, speaking of my organisation, I have hired Tom. Yes, I have.
Yes. How did that come about? Tell us about it. Do you have a program in place? Was it just kind of luck of the draw?
I would say it was completely luck of the draw that Tom came our way, and we are exceptionally lucky to have him joining as a trainee. That was actually through what you could argue is an alternative route into the profession. So at Clifford Chance, I've been there 15 years. We've tried a number of things. We have very formal routes in, which would be traditional graduate programs, traditional internship programs leading to graduate programs. We've had, many years ago, an intelligent aid scheme, which was all about not looking at formal academics, but assessing candidates through responses to essay-style questions, which could lead to a vacation scheme, which could lead to a training contract. But the route that Tom came through was actually our partnership with Undergraduate of the Year, and we founded the LGBT Undergraduate of the Year, and we also have Young Activist Undergraduate of the Year, which is an attempt to go out into the UK market to say we are looking for examples of excellence of students who are still undergraduates that can demonstrate all of these amazing skills and attributes that wouldn't necessarily be packaged up through that traditional selection process that you would see of an application form and psychometric tests and assessment days. Now, that's not to say that doesn't happen, and Tom's actually been through almost like a triple assessment process to get to where he is now. So it's certainly never a case of a backdoor into the organisation, but it's about being really creative and thinking more broadly about how you attract individuals to then explore how they can enter the profession. But I wanted to pick up on your point, Tom, around these senior role models, because today we actually launched with our trainee population our tailored adjustment plans, which is a 12-month pilot looking at finding a better way of pulling together adjustments that are needed in the workplace into a document that is owned by the individual and which empowers them to have those conversations internally to say, this is what I need to be able to excel in my role. This is what I need to be able to fulfill my fullest potential. And it was interesting because one of the trainees asked the question, well, this is all very well and good, but the pressure seems to be on us as trainees to upward manage the organisation rather than having a suite of senior role models that are able to talk with confidence and transparency around the adjustments that they've had during their careers. And I really think that's what's missing, and that certainly needs to be our focus. We're very good at the storytelling, but it tends to not be at those senior levels of management.
Yeah,
I think that's what one of the reasons what attracted to with the intersectionality was that with LGBT in Clifford Chance there was so many senior leaders that were so out and proud about their sexuality, and I think that is still missing with neurodiversity, and so I think in all organizations just having more senior role models around that are neurodiverse or do have a disability and are quite open about that would make such a significant change.
Yeah, I would echo that, and I think...
Oh, I've done it again. I'll stop. That's bad luck, isn't it? I was going to say we're going to call a poll, and we're going to see what the poll results are. Could we see the poll, James? Are we allowed to see what the responses are? Okay, so 84% think it's 54%. Oh no, sorry, 54% think it's 84%. Well, that is correct. Very, very, very sadly. And I wonder, when we were talking about interviews and the process by which we, evaluate talent, whether or not we need to make some adjustments to the fact that everything is kind of normalized on what a neurotypical person should do in an interview or should have in an employment process. Annabelle, let's bring you in and ask you, do you think that we need to change some of the selection processes to make them, more accessible to people from different walks of life?
Yeah, I mean, as an employer, I think there are many things that we can all try and do better, and certainly Avanade is looking at that, but we're absolutely nowhere near where we need to be. But I think it goes all the way through the assessment and selection process, starting right at the beginning with things like job descriptions. Everything needs to be very clear. It needs to be free of jargon, and we need to also be very upfront in terms of what candidates can expect in terms of what the process might look like, who they will meet, and also going back to what Tom said earlier about having role models on your website, case studies of people and individuals and how the organisation has managed to support them in terms of what they need to be successful. And I think also we're becoming much more aware of having sort of hyper-personalised type experiences for candidates. And I know that best-in-class candidate experience is something that we're very much striving to achieve. So It's as we spoke about earlier, it's asking the individual what they need, to be successful. Do they need, noise cancelling headphones, or a calm space, or short breaks? So I think there's a lot more that we can do, and a lot that employers can do to help.
Annabelle, you mentioned hyper-personalised candidate experience. It's funny when you say that, because it makes me think of the first time I met Tom. And actually, in terms of very personalised experiences, you ended up babysitting my child, didn't you? And playing table football with him for about half an hour. And that was your bonding experience. And then you came and met me. We were at National Student Pride during the festival. And it was brilliant, because it was completely out of the work environment. And it provided us an opportunity to really get to know each other over a completely different set of interactions.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think what's so good about what you were saying is that being proactive and asking someone who has a neurodiversity what adjustments you can offer, almost coming up with a menu and being like, this is what we could offer you, what would be beneficial, than otherwise waiting for an individual to come up to the organization and say, oh, look, I need extra time, or I need a quiet space. I think that's really key. Other things that I found is like video interviews, like they're looking at your facial expressions, and that's how they work with an algorithm. I'm not sure that that's really inclusive. And other things, just having those role models would make it more comfortable to come out and say, actually, I do need this adjustment, instead of thinking that by asking for it, you're already putting yourself on the back foot.
Yeah, and I think just going back to one of the points, I mean, probably like Clifford Chance, we have a huge pool of interviewers. And I think for me, awareness and education of that pool of people is absolutely vital. And one of the things we're about to launch, actually, which we haven't done for some time, is proper training on diversity for all of our assessors. I think people are very familiar with things like, gender diversity, sexual orientation, religion, but they're much less aware of neurodiversity and all of the things that, we need to be aware of. So like you said, things like video interviewing. Some individuals, are not great at eye contact or picking up social cues. And so we all need to be much more aware of that and think about the traits that actually are important for the role that you're looking for, and some of the ones that aren't important. The fact that my nephew, for example, is a stimmer, he rubs his hands on his thighs when he's trying to concentrate. And that can be off-putting if you've got no experience of that, but actually it's irrelevant to many jobs, and the fact that he does that is neither here nor there. So it's a big educational piece for me, I think, that we need to provide our management and assessors with.
Do we think that the pandemic and the ability to work from home, and because I was talking to my auntie, and she was saying, little things in the environment, fluorescent lights, fluorescent lights, trigger, her boy, food smells, can be really off-putting. Squeaky chairs, are something that he finds very difficult to kind of cope with. And it's all good and well having the right outreach and saying, we're going to bring these people on board, but that, is that a little bit like, hiring somebody in a wheelchair, but saying when they get there, there's no lift, right? Go on, Tom.
Sorry, I had that experience. I had a really great inclusive recruitment process, and I really enjoyed it. And I got my industrial placement. And then whilst I was there, sometimes the environment can be quite overwhelming sensory. So I like to listen to music. And so that wasn't allowed. So I asked for a reasonable adjustment to have headphones and listen to music at work. But that was a no. And instead, they gave me big Air Defender headphones. It made me really stick out in an organization. Big red, airplane Defender headphones. And obviously that is a reasonable adjustment. They've met the law, but that doesn't allow me to assimilate with the culture and the group I'm working with, and doesn't allow me to have my input or produce an output that would be relevant for the organization.
Yeah, I mean that's horrific, isn't it? But I can tell that wasn't that long ago, right? That this is something that's relatively recent, I suspect. So and I think we were talking about earlier. Annabelle was saying how we just need to talk about this stuff a little bit more so people are more comfortable with it, and then they'll understand more. And I think that conversation has happened. you know, the other example, I was speaking to somebody when she said she took her child to Pizza Express. When she first started taking her child to Pizza Express 10 years ago, you know, the waiters would be like, "Oh my God, that kid's got problems," and it was very, very kind of standoffish. And now they're much more supportive. I think people are becoming more aware. But I still think, you know, if you ask the general population about ADHD and you did a word association game, their response would be ASBO or expulsion or something of that nature. I don't think that we've managed to associate it with the positives. We're still talking about it as a negative.
We still got a problem, because I did some research with Tapping about 2 years ago as part of the book, and I did it with students. They got student networks across most of the universities, and basically around 20% of the students came back and said they knew what neurodiversity was, and around 19% of them associated as being neurodiverse, right? Which meant there's like 1% of them who are not neurodiverse who understand what neurodiversity is. Like, that's really small. And you got to remember that. So they're the graduates of 2 years ago, right? Coming into the workforce. Like, that means that unless you're neurodiverse, you don't know what neurodiversity is. So the problem is, those people are the managers are going to be, those people are your colleagues, you know, and that's the challenge we got, that still the people who know what neurodiversity is are neurodiverse. So we live in this bubble, right? So that's the big challenge we got to overcome. And that's at graduate level. Like, it should be the people who should be able to be inspired by this and lead it. And what really scares me is that means those students who are neurodiverse are not sharing it with their friends. Because if they did,
don't know.
It would be different.
Some of them probably don't know. I mean, some of them are probably, you know, when were you, I won't ask the age, but you were diagnosed in later life, right?
Yeah, well, no, this state, 20% came back saying, yes, I am, and I know what neurodiversity is, and I am. So my point is that the ones who, there's plenty who won't know, but my point is those students by that data are not sharing with their friends who are not neurodiverse, because otherwise more of them would know what neurodiversity is theoretically. But yeah, I was diagnosed, you know, at like 21 at university as a mature student, and ADHD was only 3 years ago. So yeah, I interviewed Tony Lloyd the other day, ADHD Foundation, and he said 50% of diagnosis of ADHD is now adults, and 3 to 5 years waiting list across the UK. So I mean, it says it there, doesn't it? There's still not enough information and support. And then you come back down to the grad level, the entry level, and you think we still got a long way to go, right? Just to bring out the awareness outside of those people who are neurodiverse.
Yeah, perhaps also, because the schooling age is the worst, I think, you know, and the hardest, you know, because I think that it is that is the age at which you're trying to make friendships, you're trying to be part of a gang, part of a certain group. The social interaction is heightened. It's important, kind of, it is heightened. Yeah, we've had an interesting question from an attendee who says, you know, how do we help each other recognize traits, triggers, and signs in those with neurodiverse needs? Now that's probably an interesting question, but the more interesting question around that is, you know, should neurodiverse people explain their situation? You know, should they be upfront about it? Do they need to be upfront about it?
I'd say that's dangerous. That's potentially dangerous. But you know, we can't impose that on people. We still don't have enough awareness. Therefore, we still don't have enough understanding. Therefore, again, to the point of, if we put the onus on those people who might have challenges, they may still be trying to figure out what that is. Like, sometimes I have a meltdown, and my daughter does. We still don't know what's going on. We're doing it at the same time. I'm doing it as an adult. She's doing it as a child. You know, so it's difficult then to get somebody to say, explain that for me. And it's like, I can't explain what's going on in my head at the moment. It's just
no. I meant it in, you know, kind of sharing. So sharing. Yeah, go on, sorry, Tom.
I think, yeah, like Theo was saying, I think it's hard to put the onus on the person that has disability. I think something that has worked well in the past is disability passports. So if you were to move around the organization, this passport moves with you, and this passport has your reasonable adjustments, any traits or triggers that may come from that, and it helps then the next manager to understand how best to manage those situations and help you as an individual.
And
I like that idea.
That's the document we launched today, the Trainee Adjustments Plan. But you're right, Theo, it is down to the individual and how much they want to share and how much they want to talk about stuff. And the way we've designed the plan is over two main areas. One, talking about your condition, talking about your disability, what it might mean. But actually, what we've realized when we started to fill these out with individuals is that you actually need to have quite a lot of prompts to be able to choose from, because sometimes it's really difficult to condense down in very simple terms to the user, which would be those that are working with them, their supervisors, their line managers, what it actually means in the workplace and what that individual needs others to be aware of. And that's quite a complex discussion with the individual that needs to be led by the individual, but then needs to be owned by everyone who's in that working relationship. And one of the areas that we discuss is this idea of what a bad day looks like at work, and what those triggers might be, and how you as a supervisor can perhaps minimize those triggers or be aware of those triggers. But it does require the individual being confident and comfortable enough talking about those issues.
I think
maybe, yeah. No, you go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Very quickly, I was just going to say, and we need to think about the language as well that we use. I think Amanda and I have learned over the last year, as two people who are immersing ourselves in this conversation, right? Language can be tough, especially if you're dyslexic, because big words. I spent half the time trying to figure out what the word is. Then I spent half the time trying to remember what that word is so that I can communicate in the right way. And that word impacts me, right? So that becomes difficult when we're using language, kind of the medical paradigm, right, which we don't understand as human beings. And I think that happens in the recruitment process as well. So we have a tick box that says you need a reasonable adjustment. I'm like, no, I don't need a reasonable adjustment. But the reality is I do, right? But I don't want to tick a disability box to say I need a reasonable adjustment. But if I've got an opportunity to say, hey, Theo, what can we do to make you better? What can we do to give you a platform to show your best self? Then I might be more inclined to go, actually, I could do with 15 minutes before. And if you can provide me with the questions to the interview, as long as they're not like, what's 2 + 2? Then that would be great, because that's going to help me focus my mind so I don't go off on some rant about something. And then some shiny thing goes in the corner of the room and I'm off. So I think it's those types of adjustments that we need to make as organizations that allow people to put their hand up. And they don't have to go, I'm dyslexic. They can just go, hey, can I have a bit more time on the test, please? I read a bit slower, right? Or I don't spell so well, or whatever it may be. But I think we just need to give more opportunities throughout the process, and then when they're on board, and then when they're in the organisation, to put their hand up in a really quiet way. That doesn't mean they've got to put a big flag or big earphones on their head that's like a big banner saying, look at me. Like, none of us want that.
Yeah, I think...
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think there's also work to be done at the beginning, like Laura was saying about National Student Pride. That was an informal event that happened before the recruitment process. Other things, like I've seen organizations do specific career experiences for those that have a disability or are neurodiverse. And what's really encouraging is universities themselves are now having careers mentors that are specifically for individuals that have a disability. So those students can go to that specific careers mentor who will then help and provide support on the process. So it's not just from the organization, but also from universities, and that side can really help as well.
And sorry, the point I was also going to add to both Theo and Tom's, which goes quite nicely, is that it's not also just about neurodiversity. It's about what an individual needs for themselves, be they neurodiverse or not. It's, how can we adapt the environment to best suit you? Maybe you need to leave work early on a Thursday because you've got childcare, or you may want, balance balls or noise cancelling headphones or whatever it is that you might need. But you need to check your attitude. You need to check, what works and amend how people, how they work so that you suit it to that individual. Going back to that hyper-personalization, Laura, that we talked about before. But I think that's a skill that all managers, people managers, should have, is making sure that they're aware of what everybody on their team needs, and adapt that to their, to get the best out of them.
just on that point, and it's brilliant that actually I think COVID, what's happened, right, is the rule book has been thrown out the window or the door, right? Or some kind of explosion has gone off and blown it up. But the thing is we need to remember this, and in organizations, we need to go, when we threw that rule book out of the window, because all of a sudden one day we were like, go home. We don't know what we're going to do. You got to go home. We may send you a computer. We may not. We have no idea, right? But we're just, day by day, we're going to try and do what we can, right? Organizations, there's too much bureaucracy. You know, tech startups are showing us what we should be doing, i.e., you know, technology, being able to wear noise cancelling headphones or a wide variety of other stuff. And that being forced home has really been a game changer. And I think what we need to do now is cut out the bureaucracy, because we proved we can do it when we needed to, and really think about kind of the human approach. And I think if we could all just do a bit more of that, and all just think, you know, is this bureaucracy, isn't it? How do I cut through it? Or is it actually, you know, legally we could be negatively impacted and really end up in court if we make a bad decision here? You know, they're very two different things to me, and we have to all together. Too much fear.
Laura, do you think we'll spring back to normality? Do you think that we're going to have people, you know, saying that they want to work from home, you know, maybe at Clifford Chance, maybe at your kind of legal peers and further afield? And actually, we're going to lose an opportunity here to kind of open up the door to a lot more people from different walks of life?
I don't know if we're going to spring back. I don't think it's going to be a sudden jump back to normality or whatever normality used to be. I think they're listening to the trainees that have been on the programme over the last 18 months and not been in the office. There is a burning desire to get back in and meet people and sit with people and talk to people face to face and learn by osmosis, and have all of that benefit of being in a physical environment with not only their peers, but with their supervisors and their seniors. And that is a desperate need that I'm hearing time and time again. But it's also interesting that when we launched the trainee adjustment plan today, that there is a real fear that, like you've said, some of the amazing benefits that come from working from home, especially those from neurodiverse backgrounds, will be lost if we all return to the old way of working. So I definitely think you'll see a hybrid. You'll see a hybrid approach when it comes to working arrangements. You'll see a hybrid approach in terms of what we do in terms of our day-to-day bread and butter graduate recruitment campaigns. There has to be. And I think the best organisations will be looking at making sure they keep those elements that allow individuals to excel and perform to their fullest potential when they create this new model for what work looks like in the next 6 to 12 months' time.
Yeah, I think once you open the kind of Pandora's box and you say that inclusivity is the most important thing to our organization, you know, where do you draw the line? You can't say, well, look, it's inclusive if you're from a minority, it's inclusive if you're from a gender, but if you're from a certain you know, neurodiverse background, it's not inclusive. Yeah, and that's the kind of point I think you're kind of talking to, Annabelle, is how we communicate in the office and how we talk and how we raise these issues, I think needs to be much more you know, broad spread. But that can only happen if the recruiting process is one that allows people from those backgrounds to get access to those roles. You know, and we have adverse impact reports for gender and for ethnicity. I can't remember being asked by any corporate for an adverse impact report from neurodiversity, and I suspect that it will come. You know, and it will come because if you look at, well, I'm hopeful. You know, if you look at the shift in, let's say, mental health. 10 years ago, I had a contract that said that if I had a mental health condition, that I could be summary dismissed. What? And yeah, and when I talked about it, I actually found out quite a few contracts had this in. It wasn't actually that rare to have it as a clause in the contract. Yeah, and you look at where we are 10, 11 years later from that, and we've got, you know, in our company, you can, you know, get a therapist on tap within a couple of hours with an app. You know, we've completely changed the conversation about mental health. You know, mental health was stigmatized in a way that I think maybe in some walks of life, neurodiverse people have been stigmatized. And I'm hopeful that that will change. And I think my opinion is that the working from home piece is quite a big part of that jigsaw. And I think if we lose it, then we've lost a big opportunity.
I also like the fact that COVID has brought about other changes, not necessarily just working from home, but with teenage kids, the whole exam piece. You know, I had one doing A-levels and one doing GCSEs, and I think that looking at the educational system and how we rate people's success in terms of exams and grades, I'm really hopeful that we will see a seismic change, because I don't necessarily think that the old process has been hugely successful. I think it just you know, it just tells you one thing about an individual, that they're good at retaining information and, you know, they're good at exams. Don't necessarily think it tells you much more about them. So I very much hope that changes too.
Yeah, or they've got their own bedroom and their own desk and table, and they've got their own computer. They share a bedroom with 3 other kids. They have no computer. You know, there's all of those impacts. I hope educational reform is going to come in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, I lost spelling in every single exam. I probably lost a grade or half a grade in every single exam, not because of what I was saying in the exam or on the paper, but because, you know, I spelt the words incorrectly on the journey there. We got a question in here from Andy Moore, who's one of the attendees. He says, yeah, how can we best structure a recruitment process that avoids traditional techniques, i.e. interview group work, that may be difficult for neurodivergent candidates or neurodifferent candidates? I mean, is that possible? You know, is there a way of assessing talent in large organizations that avoids those kind of stumbling blocks? And are they stumbling blocks? Can they be orchestrated in ways where they're not?
Well, my immediate reaction to that is yes, in a number of ways. And I think it very much depends on what type of job you're looking for. But I think if you assess the actual traits, behaviours and skills that are relevant to that particular job, you don't always need, for example, a face-to-face interview or a group exercise. You could test people's, you know, aptitude for learning from mistakes or risk-taking from clever, innovative ways, you know, psychometric tests or games on their mobile phones, for example. So I think that's one way in which we can do it. But again, the second point goes back to education and the people that are involved in that assessment process, just being much more aware of the diversity that we have and the actual traits that are important and key to be successful in that role, to try and dismiss some of the other things that just aren't relevant.
I think some of the things that plug into that process as well need to change significantly. We need to find better ways to work across technologies. So I think technology can play a really positive part in enabling more people to get through that process and be successful through that process. But whilst we still have, you buy this technology and use this many people and you get a reduction based on volume, organizations are going to pick one psychometric technology over another, or they're going to pick one ATS over another, or they're going to pick... And that's the problem we've got, you see, because we implement these technologies, we find they cause problems, and then it's really hard to move those technologies out. And sometimes they're not able to develop the things that we need as organizations. So one, we need to get better at picking them in the first place. But two, I think those technology companies need to work together. We need to enforce it so that we can make different choices. Therefore, the candidates have different options of how they're assessed through the process. Lego.
I bang this drum on a regular basis. Yeah, it's all good and well changing behavior. It's all good and well changing recruiters and doing training, but that assumes that the systems aren't part of the problem. And the systems are part of the problem. You know, we've got a report out that shows that using traditional kind of ATS video interviewing systems, you know, Black and Asian candidates were up to 18% equal ability, up to 18% less likely to pass the screening process. You know, and that was based on 18,000 applicants. So it was a big study. I'd hate to think if we'd plugged in, you know, a demographic around neurodivergent, neurodifferent people, what that would have shown. And I think you're right, Annabelle. You know, the problem is, yeah, in the absence of knowledge, we just fall back on the things that we've always done to measure what we think is workplace performance. But what does you know, exams or the things that we do, you know, at A level or history or UCAS points, you know, what effect do they really have on in-work performance?
Well,
yeah,
I
I
think
would argue
that's the point, isn't it? You need to have data, and you can have very advanced data analytics that help you really look at the predictive validity of your processes or your decision-making criteria. Or you can be taking, and I'd argue everyone should be doing that, but sometimes that's quite difficult because the data is difficult to capture, or you might not have the budgets or the resources internally to do that. But at a very basic level, anybody who is involved with recruitment should be looking at adverse impact in terms of the proportional representation of students from different demographics at each stage of your selection process. And that is fairly simple data analysis from any single applicant tracking system. And that is a really easy way of seeing warning flags that you've got potential issues or barriers that might exist which require further investigation. And I would argue that most recruiters should be doing that across all of those different diversity characteristics as a matter of course at the end of every year.
They're not.
Well, they should be.
And actually, you know, I've audited, even in the last 4 weeks, I've audited, you know, pretty much every one of the major ATSs, and you'll be surprised how many times that, you know, it's like tick if you've got a disability. It doesn't allow you to state what the disability is. It doesn't allow you to classify how it is. As far as they're concerned, you might be, you know, in a wheelchair, or you might be neurodivergent, or you might be something else. So I think that whilst that might be the case for gender, it's certainly not the case yet for most organizations around the subject matter today.
I think measures are quite difficult anyway in terms of neurodiversity, just because neurodiversity has a gender issue. Around autism specifically, I think it's something like 7 boys for every 1 girl is diagnosed with autism because of the stereotypes around autism. So, and females are normally able to more camouflage those stereotypes. So I think that's also an issue when it comes to measuring.
So I've just had a really interesting poll, a question rather, that's come to us. Do you think you should tackle one type of diversity at a time and get it right before moving on to another, or should you do all types at the same time? Laura?
Oh, goodness. My team, if you ask my team what I would say to that, they would say that I say do everything or simultaneously, which breaks everyone completely and utterly. So I think you need to have focus. I think you need to have, Theo was talking about the importance of intersectionality, and you can't do any of these things in isolation. But I think you need to be focused with your data and with your efforts, and then measure that, and then work out what you do next, rather than a spray and pray, just do everything for everyone. So that's a bit of a mixed answer. So, but I do think there is a need to have the data and work out where the biggest barriers exist. And 9 times out of 10, when you're looking at barriers, the barriers that you're breaking down, whether you're looking at it from a socioeconomic perspective, from an ethnicity perspective, from a neurodiverse perspective, a lot of them are quite similar. And the solutions in terms of everything Annabelle's been saying, in terms of educating, getting better vocab, better training for your staff, for your supervisors, for your interviewers, all of that's relevant whether you're addressing X, Y, or Z problem.
Yeah, I mean, you can't solve one type of inclusion without solving inclusion in general. So I think that is, I think that's quite strong. Yeah, Annabelle, in your role as, you know, global transformation for Avanade, yeah, are these things that you're discussing internally? You know, what are the things that we need to concentrate? Do we need to concentrate? Should we focus? You know, I would argue perhaps it's easier to do more things these days, but that doesn't mean that it's easier to get them right.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that you make, and also what Laura said. I think we should all be doing the right thing, which is looking at everything holistically and solving for one. I think, you know, it has a positive impact on solving for all different types of diversity. I think practically, though, it's very difficult from a bandwidth perspective to do all things and be all things to all people at every moment. And so certainly from my perspective, we certainly have a focus because things are more pressing in certain areas than they are in others. So, for example, in our technology practice in growth markets, for example, we have a significant gender issue, far more prevalent than we do in somewhere like the US, where we are looking at things like neurodiversity, because from the data we've got, that's the next area that we need to focus on. So I guess I think what I'm trying to say is, in an ideal world, we should do it all at once, because that's the right thing to do. But practically, I think we just have to take a little bit of a step back and think about where we can make the most impact in the shortest space of time. And so that's the approach that we're taking, although I wish it was different.
Yeah, I think, Laura mentioned it. If you have the data, you can come back to the problem, or you can come back to the challenge. You can, I think, you can set up base levels of systems and processes that allow you to, tackle these problems much more easily down the line if you kind of get it set up the right way to begin with. If you see what my logic is there.
Yeah, and I think many organisations just don't have that data. The larger organisations like Accenture, for example, have been tracking all of this for years and years and years, but other organisations just simply don't have that basic level of data. So I think for many that is a stumbling block.
And that leads me kind of on to the next point is, when we do these kind of panels, one of the feedbacks that we get is, oh, that's great, but they're a big company and I'm not in a big company. And actually the majority of companies are, in the SME space, right? That's the reality of life. So it's all good and well having a program for, Microsoft having a program that does X, and that's great PR and that's super, but actually, that's like 0.1 of the tip of the iceberg. To actually have someone progress around this, it needs to kind of cascade into the small and medium-sized businesses. Theo, in your work talking to people, is there something that you've seen that is, are there lower hanging fruits that if people are just starting on this journey and they want to hire young people into their organization, but they're not Clifford Chance, they're not Avanade, they're not big organizations like Accenture, is there some things you've seen that you think is a good idea, somewhere to start?
Yeah, definitely. I think and I mentioned it earlier about, I don't know, use tech startups or whatever, or scale ups, but ultimately organizations that are starting or scaling up, right, and they're rapidly hiring people, they need people with great minds. They need young people to come into the organization, young, dare I say it, graduates, they could be any age, right? But they need these people to come in to the organization and help them on that growth trajectory, right? Now they have the opportunity to cut through some of this bureaucracy. So actually they are able to say, hey, I've seen some great examples of organizations saying, as part of onboarding, we'll give you noise cancelling headphones. We'll get everyone, not just people who put their hand up, because we think it's great that everybody can have noise cancelling headphones so they can focus on their work, or they can ensure that when the kids are going crazy in the background, that it just reduces the noise just a little bit when you're anxious on that call with a customer or whoever it may be, right? So small organizations have the opportunity to really give that personal kind of help and approach to their workforce. But they need to start having those conversations. And again, it doesn't need to be, we're doing this, and I'm not calling it, right? Because at the end of the day, any work that's done around neurodiversity, whether it's a single line around autism or whatever else it may be, is good, right? We want to promote that. We want more of it, right? It's great. However, the reality is that we're complex human beings, and most people who may be autistic may also be dyslexic and ADHD. And so that's where the complexity comes in. So if we could just try and focus on the individual in these smaller organizations, speak to our workforce, look at what they need and require, and see what we can open up and what we can offer. Because a lot of the technology, assistive technology that's there now, is within the technology we already have. We just need to switch it on. And that's the important thing. So understand your technology, understand what you can do within your environment, speak to your people, and then speak to people as they come through the recruitment process, and just make the simple changes. Because it's not hard, I promise you.
Tom, as a semi-recent candidate, if you could give people one piece of advice, what might that be?
I think really just make sure that there is a role model, or there is a, that what you're saying on the job spec matches what the internal culture will be. Because I've been and applied for so many organizations where there is a sentence that says we are inclusive of all differences, and then you get to the organization and the rhetoric doesn't match the reality. And I think really have to be really open and honest about the psychological contract that you're creating through these job specs, because it will just lead to a disenfranchised worker, really, and someone that won't feel very included. So just really be honest and upfront about what your organization can do for inclusivity.
Yeah, I mean, job specs are already pretty rubbish, but when you think of the mumbo jumbo that's in there and how that might be literally taken, then that makes it just 10 times worse. Laura, just we're kind of slightly kind of wrapping up. Is there one piece of advice that you would say to organizations if you were going to do some consulting work for a smaller organization in this space? You'd say, right, I think this is a good place to start. What might that be?
One thing, talk to the people who are actually the people with the neurodiverse conditions, and find out from them what they need and what their lived experience is. 100% talk to people. Someone's written the question, what resources would you need? For me, it's all about talking and educating myself with those lived experiences. Super.
And Annabelle?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think talk to your employees and maybe set up a network or a resource group so that you can really build on their knowledge and their expertise to help change things. And for me, again, it's all about education. I came to it because people in my family are neurodiverse, and I read up as much as I could. There are loads of books. We're really lucky to have Theo on the call, but TED Talks, I just tried to find out as much as I could, and there is a wealth of information out there. But absolutely, if you're talking to an organization, it would be talk to your people.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've done, and we are in that tech bucket perhaps that Theo talks about, is that we've really implemented asynchronous communications. So what that means is we have an online kind of channel where we communicate, but we don't expect you to answer to that immediately. So we're not overwhelmed. We're trying not to overwhelm people. It's not like we'll come up to you and ask you a million questions. And actually, people thought that going remote, that would be less so. But sometimes when you've got a Slack channel or something else, the impetus is, I need to know this information straight away, right away. And I think that can be quite challenging and can certainly break the stride of some people. So, quite an easy thing to do if you're in a small organization is, don't ask for communications to be done instantly, have them asynchronous, allow people to kind of answer when they've got time. Look, this has been super and fantastic, and I've really enjoyed everyone's opinion. Go and listen to Theo's podcast. I've listened to it. It's riveting. He's brilliant. He's got a book. Do not buy the hardback cover book unless you want to remortgage your property or make them very rich. But it's been brilliant, Tom, to have you on the panel. And when Laura suggested it, I was kind of jumping up and down, because to have somebody with lived experience in this space, is just so valuable. Annabelle, sorry for interrupting you at the top of the conversation. I'll make sure that I won't do it again. And Laura, thank you so much for being here and introducing Tom and your valuable opinion. So thank you very much to everybody. The live stream is going to end now, and we can stay on if you like, guys, and have a quick debrief.